Hi guys, welcome to the first lecture of the first unit on the Constitution. Feel free to pause this video, start it back up, slow it down, whatever you need that works best for you. We are starting with the Constitution because the Constitution is going to lay the groundwork for where we go with the entire rest of the course. We are going to start with the legislative branch in the branches of government because the legislative branch is Article 1 of the Constitution. Now, think back to the major issues that the colonials had with the British monarchy. So, their big phrase, if we can remember, is no taxation without representation. So, the biggest gripe was there was no colonial representation in the British Parliament. So, of course, when the founding fathers sit down to write what form of government they are going to choose to have for this nation that they fought to have, is of course going to be how do we represent the people in the government effectively. So, this being first shows how important that was to the founding fathers. It also shows their understanding that you can't have every person in the population speaking for themselves. There has to be a representative body to make it more efficient. So, in this democratic republic that we have, we select those members, the people, the population selects those members to make the decisions on their behalf. The primary duty of the legislative branch is to pass laws that will benefit society the most, that will help the people speak to their needs. And it's also known as Congress. Very rarely do we hear the legislative branch, the legislative branch. No, more in the news, you're going to hear Congress. The purpose of Congress is to write laws that speak to the people. It is also to listen to the needs of the public and change the Constitution over time, if need be, to make sure the government is speaking to the needs of the people. There are two parts of Congress. The first part we're going to go over is the Senate. There are 50 senators in Congress, 2 per state. That is equal representation for all 50 states. A senator will serve for 6 years. Now, in the Senate, elections are held every 2 years for 1/3 of those 50 members. That way, we don't completely get rid of all 50 at the same time. We are replacing a third of those. When we look at leadership within the Senate, the head of the Senate is the vice president. Right now, that is Mike Pence. The other leadership that we see in the Senate, there's a president pro tempore, which is Chuck Grassley, a Republican. The Republican leader right now is Mitch McConnell, and the Democratic leader right now is Chuck Schumer from New York. Now, just like every other state, New York has 2 senators. The 2 senators we have are Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand. The duties of the Senate include passing bills, which are pre-laws, to approve treaties by the president. This is important. So when the president who represents the United States goes out and speaks with foreign leaders, treaties can be negotiated, but that's the end of it there for the president's role. Those treaties have to come back to the Senate and be approved because they are the voice of the people. The president cannot make decisions for the entire country by themselves. It has to be a collective choice there to go and be in a relationship, a foreign relationship with other countries. So those treaties have to be approved by the Senate. The Senate also approves selections by the president of federal officers. These federal officers include the cabinet, Supreme Court officials, federal judges. Think of the Senate approval process as a really extensive interview. It is not done by all 50 members of Congress. There are committees that are selected to do these interviews, and what they do is they check everything. They check the past job history of these selected officials. They ask them questions about different scenarios that they would handle during that job to make sure that they really are meant for those positions. Without the approval of the Senate, they cannot take on those federal offices. They are also the jury in case of impeachment trial. As jury, they review the evidence. They look at what is the crime at hand. So before the president can be impeached, there has to be a trial, and that jury is the Senate. Now, I want us to take a look at the Senate oath of office here. So it says, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That just means that as a senator, they're not going to go against the rest of the Constitution that has already been laid out. And they will defend and support the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, here and abroad. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely. Nobody's pressuring me. There is no mental reservation or purpose of evasion. I'm not doing this with any hidden background, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. So, the pledge to office. Now, the first Congress is going to kind of rework what was in the Constitution to a more simple phrase, 14 words. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States. Okay, that's a little less of a mouthful than what is actually in the Constitution. But during Civil War times, the war is going to inspire a change to this oath of office that is called a test oath. So in July of 1862, every person that was elected or appointed to office in the Senate had to swear or affirm that they had never previously engaged in criminal or disloyal conduct. So really that showed that during the Civil War, we don't want anybody in the Senate that is going to go against the government or work against the ideas of the government. Those employees or those potential senators that would not take that oath of office, that would not use that test oath, would not receive their salary. And those who did take this oath and swore falsely would be persecuted for perjury and forever denied federal employment. So during the Civil War, you see this oath change even a little bit more, to kind of say, okay, we only want these certain people who are willing to say this come in and be a senator. If you've ever committed a crime before, you cannot be here. But in 1884, a new generation of lawmakers came in and repealed that test oath, leaving intact today's normal baseline constitutional allegiance in the Senate oath. So it goes back to, I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States. So over time, it has changed a little bit. Now, I want you to think about this. You hear a lot about the Senate in the news today. Do you think that they're upholding the Constitution? Do you think that they're following that oath? And I also want to pose the question to you, do you think we should go back and put that test oath in there? Is that something that maybe you would want to see senators take, that they have not committed a crime, that they will not commit a crime? Think about that, and we'll talk about that when we get on to our virtual meeting. Now, the House of Representatives is the second part of Congress. There are 435 voting members within the House of Representatives. A term for a person in the House of Representatives is 2 years. So this is a quicker turnover than what we saw with the Senate. This is every 2 years. There's more within the House of Representatives at 435 members that is based on population. And that number can change over time, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But because there are more members, The House of Representatives is meant to, or qualified as, classified as, closer to the people. So it is supposed to be a direct line of the people to the representatives in the House. Now, when we look at leadership within the House, the Speaker of the House right now is Nancy Pelosi. She is a Democrat from California's 12th district. The Speaker of the House is actually second in line to the president after the vice president. So if something happened to the president, something happened to the vice president, the next person in line would be the Speaker of the House. Now, other leadership that we see within the House of Representatives, we have the Democratic Majority Leader, Representative Steny Hoyer, and then we have the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy. Now, if we look at just New York State, there are 27 districts within New York State. District 23 is the district that we belong to in Cuba, New York, and the representative that is currently serving is Tom Reed, a Republican. Now, the duties of the House of Representatives include passing bills, just like the Senate. It is identical. The next duty of the House of Representatives is revenue bills. Revenue is money. All of the money is handled by the House of Representatives. We call this the power of the purse. The reason this belongs to the House of Representatives is because they are supposed to be the closest to the people. So the voice of the people is heard by the House. Therefore, they deal with the money. So that power is exclusively given to the House of Representatives. They are the sole power of impeachment. So if an impeachment proceeding is going to begin, it begins with the House of Representatives. They have to vote to begin those impeachment trials. Another important power of the House of Representatives is that if no president is chosen by the Electoral College, no winner is determined, the House of Representatives picks who wins. That's a pretty hefty power. So because they're the voice of the people, the closest line of the general population within the federal government, they would choose who the president is if no clear winner is declared. That is a pretty big responsibility. So I have been talking about the Senate and the House. Both of their main exclusive powers is to write bills and those become laws. So what the heck is the process of a bill becoming a law? Well, first, a bill is generated in Congress. It's the first thing that happens. They have to write it. That idea comes from their constituents or the people that they represent. So those can start in either the House or the Senate, with the only rule being any bill that has to do with revenue starts in the House. The next step is that the bill is going to be referred to a committee. Committees are groups, smaller groups within Congress existing in both the House and the Senate, and those committees are specialized. They are well versed in the specifics of that bill. So if it's an education bill, it's going to go to the Education Committee to evaluate. If that committee, let's say we're starting in the House of Representatives, so the bill starts in the House, it goes to the Education Committee within the House. If that committee approves of that, it will go to the larger group in the House of Representatives. It'll go before all 435 members to be approved. So let's say the House of Representatives gives it the okay. That bill then goes on to the Senate. The Senate has to go through the same process. Once the bill is received in the Senate, it goes to the Education Committee there. It would have to be approved. If any changes are made to that bill, or if the committee within the Senate rejects that bill, it has to be sent back to the House. It has to be reevaluated, revoted on. The whole process has to start all over again. But for the sake of our conversation, let's just say that both houses have approved it. The Senate floor approves it after their committee gives it the good old okay. Once that okay has been received by all 435 members in the House and all 50 members in the Senate, it then goes on to the president. The president has a few options here. The president can sign the bill, and if they do, that's the end. The bill becomes a law. The president can choose to veto the bill. If the bill is vetoed, it goes back to Congress. It will then have to be voted on, and if 2/3 of all of Congress, House and Senate, approve of that bill, then it can override the president's veto. But they also have the ability to change the bill, make corrections to it. Maybe the president says, I don't like this specific part of this bill. Then they can say, okay, well, we're going to change this. We'll pass it along to the president and he'll sign it and it'll become a law. They can agree that the Senate and the House can both agree and say, well, this law is absolute garbage. It's never going to get passed. We're never going to get the 2/3 majority. The president will never approve of it, and they can throw it away. And then, like I said, there's that other option of overriding the president's veto. So that is the process of a bill becoming a law. And if you would like more, a little bit shorter sing-song explanation of this, the Schoolhouse Rock video that is included in your Teams is a great video to watch, how a bill becomes a law. Now, the census is the last topic that we need to cover with the legislative branch. The census is required by the Constitution every 10 years to be taken. The census is a fancy way of saying count. We are counting the people every 10 years to see if there's any change. They chose 10 years because it's a nice round number that gives enough time to pass to see how the population has altered. Now, the reasons for the census, first and foremost, it determines the number of representatives in the House of Representatives. So the number can change in the House over time based on the population. So in New York, if the population goes up, we may receive more representatives. If the population goes down, we may lose representatives. The census will determine that. Another reason for the census is it is an examination of the population to see how the government and businesses can best serve the people. So it's looking at different needs of the population over time to see if new businesses should be there. Maybe it needs more government support in certain areas. It also tells the government how federal money should be divided among state and local governments. So if a place in New York has a steep increase in population, maybe the federal government needs to send more money that way. Or the opposite can happen. There can be a steep decrease in population, and we could see a decrease in federal funding. The census also is used to determine voting districts. So it's determined you are in District 23. It can redefine those lines of that district, not the number, but the lines that exist. The political cartoon that you see on the screen is one that is often used along with the census. So you see Uncle Sam there saying about time to measure yourself, and you've got the house, and you see Uncle Sam saying, let's measure the house to see if it goes along with what the census says. Because over time, the House of Representatives representation within can change. The second piece that we need to go over is the executive branch. We are going to go over powers, purpose, and other related topics. First, the executive branch begins with the representation. You have the president and the vice president. Current president, Donald Trump. Current vice president, Mike Pence. The duty of the executive branch is to execute laws. That means they are carrying out the Constitution and laws that are passed by Congress to the people. The main leadership that we see here is the president and the vice president, and the purpose was to be a leader of the country. We did not want a king or a queen, but we wanted an elected official that would carry out the taking care of the government, taking care of the people, be a representative to go and represent the United States with foreign nations during a time of crisis, during a time of prosperity. One of the jobs of the president is the State of the Union. And what's interesting is this job in the Constitution says the president shall from time to time give the Congress information of the State of the Union and recommend their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. So that doesn't say that it should be given on TV. It doesn't say how often it should happen. It doesn't even give specifics on what should be included other than what they shall judge necessary and expedient for the United States. So the State of the Union has altered over time, and that's just an example of how the powers of the president has changed. The original powers of the president, it first began to change with George Washington during his presidency and have evolved, and we'll see this as we study presidents over time. And the State of the Union going from being an address to Congress every once in a while to being nationally televised for the American public to view is just one example. Now, just like we looked at the Senate oath of office, I also want to look at the presidential oath of office. So, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So, this here is saying again, I will defend the Constitution. I will protect it from anyone who may try to destroy it. I will preserve the legacy of the Constitution. And those words are very important even today, because our government is our Constitution. And a huge duty of the president is to defend that, to make sure that stays safe. Now, if we look at what the specific duties of the president are that go hand in hand with the Constitution, the president is the face of the United States when it comes to foreign affairs. They will go out and speak to other foreign leaders, negotiate treaties that will be brought back and approved by the Senate. The president is also known as the commander-in-chief, which means that they can go and say, okay, we want troops to go to this specific area to aid our foreign allies. But the difference there is that is not a declaration of war. A declaration of war can only be carried out by Congress. The president can send soldiers wherever he so chooses to aid our foreign allies, but that is not a declaration of war. Commander-in-chief can only command the military to be in different places, but cannot say our whole nation is going to war. No one person has that power. That is the power of the Congress. The president also has the ability to veto laws. That's a check and balance of the legislative branch. And as I mentioned before, the president can appoint judges, they can appoint cabinet members, they can appoint advisors, and appoint department heads, all of which must be approved by the Senate. The president also can grant pardons. Now, a pardon excuses you from a crime, but I don't want you to think that the president is pardoning people from parking tickets. That's not happening. A presidential pardon would be for a federal crime. The best example of this, we won't see it for a little while, but is President Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon, which was a very broad pardon that said any crimes that you may have committed during your presidency, you are pardoned for. And that one was really interesting because Ford didn't say specifically for Watergate. He kind of left the door open to say, Nixon, you are pardoned for any crime that you committed during this time frame. So a federal pardon from the president is just that. It is for a federal crime. Now, the cabinet. When we look at the cabinet, this is another piece that has evolved over time. The cabinet is a part of what we call the unwritten constitution. This has been a tradition of presidents, beginning with Washington and being carried out ever since. It's tradition. It is not something that was formally written down, but it is something that has always been done. The duty of the cabinet is to advise the president because the president can't possibly know everything all the time, right? It's one person. So the duty of the cabinet is to advise the president on all knowledge possible that they could need. The original cabinet under Washington only had 4 members. We had the Secretary of State, Jefferson, the Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of War, Henry Knox, and then the Attorney General, Edmund Randolph. So these 4 cabinet members advised the president first. The Secretary of State advised in foreign affairs. The Secretary of War advised in any conflicts we may come up into. The Secretary of Treasury was all about the money. And the Attorney General was defending the legal rights of the United States. Now, the current cabinet has 15 members in it. So that's a huge evolution over time. The last department was Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security, which was added post 9/11. So then you can see that that was the last one that we found out just 19 years ago that we needed to add again to the cabinet. We needed to have someone who had all the knowledge on terrorism. But you can see that there are many other departments that Washington wouldn't have needed. He didn't need the Department of Transportation. He didn't need the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture. So you see that it's changed over time to speak to the needs of the country, and it's grown because our nation has grown. Our interactions with other countries have grown. And these representatives here in the cabinet, again, the duty is to advise the president on all of these different issues. Now, how the heck do we choose the president? The term of the presidency is 4 years. So one single term is 4 years. One president can serve 2 terms, a total of 8 years. They do not have to be consecutive. We have seen one president in the past serve 2 terms that were not consecutive, but only can serve for 8 years. The original Constitution didn't even speak to how many terms. It wasn't passed until after Franklin Roosevelt served into a 4th term that we passed the 22nd Amendment that said, okay, we're limiting this, 2 terms for each president. So how do they get elected? All right, let me get back to it. The election happens. There's a couple a couple votes, a couple counts that come into play here. First, the Electoral College. You must win 270 Electoral College votes in order to receive the presidency. Now, let's back up a little bit. How do we determine the number of electors for each state? You can see here, this is the election of 2016. In New York, there were 29 electors. Where the heck did we get that number? That number came from, in New York, there are 27 representatives in the House, and there are 2 senators. Take a look at Alaska. Alaska, low population, only has 1 representative in the House, but has 2 senators, so they get 3 electors. Now, electors are people who are chosen by party members within the state. They are not the senators and representatives. They are other people who will cast those ballots. The number is simply based on senators and representatives. So that's the first count that comes into play when talking election. The second count is the popular vote. So what the heck is the popular vote? The popular vote is the people's literal ballot. So when I cast a ballot in the election, that is my popular vote. Each state counts their popular vote. Once we see what the actual count of the people is, that determines how the electors of that state will vote. So in New York, if the popular vote chooses the Democratic candidate, because we can see that it's blue, so New York chose Clinton in the 2016 election. She won the popularity vote. All 29 electors went to her. Now let's look at a state like Texas. In Texas, the popular vote, the majority of the people's vote cast in the election box, was for Trump. So Trump won all 38 of the electors for Texas. That doesn't mean, though, that in New York, people didn't vote for Trump. There were still votes that were cast in New York for Trump. Just like in Texas, that doesn't mean that there were no votes cast for Clinton. Just the majority is how we get determined here. So the popular vote does come into play, and it goes hand in hand with the Electoral College vote. So when we think about the Electoral College, maybe we're already hearing some red flags that come in. And I want to look back at the Federalist Papers. You guys are going to be reading some of the Federalist Papers, but Federalist Paper 68 was written by Alexander Hamilton. Now, the Federalist Papers were written in order to argue for the passing of the Constitution. So, and we'll get to this in subsequent lectures, but the Federalist Papers were written to get people in the United States, in the 13 United States, to vote yes on the Constitution. The Federalist Papers were a collection of essays. This essay, number 68, was written by Alexander Hamilton on the Electoral College. So, he says it was equally desirable that the immediate election should be made by men most capable of analyzing the qualities adapted to the station and acting under circumstances favorable to deliberation and to blah, 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 blah. Okay, so what is he saying here? Men most capable of analyzing the qualities. So he's saying we only want the most educated people in the United States making these decisions. So that was an argument for the Electoral College. He goes on to say a small number of persons selected by their fellow citizens. So electors in the past were chosen by the general public, that popular vote. So in the past, someone in colonial times could have known who their elector was, but had no idea who was running for president, because a small number of persons would be casting those ballots, the electoral ballots. And that small number according to Hamilton, will be most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations. So he's saying we only wanted smart people choosing who the president was, that we wanted an educated group, because let's think about it. When the founding fathers are writing the Constitution, the general public didn't have access to knowledge that we have today. There wasn't a 24-hour news cycle. Some of them didn't even get a newspaper. They had no idea what was going on. So how the heck would they be able to choose who the president was back in those times? He's saying it was particularly desirable to afford as little opportunity as possible to tumult and disorder. He's saying if we let the general public choose who the president was, it would be a complete chaos. And we want to avoid that because this is the most important agency in the government, the President of the United States. We don't want that happening. So he ends with, but the precautions which have been so happily concerted in the system under consideration promise an effectual security against this mischief. So he's saying with the Electoral College, we avoid any chances of someone tampering with our election. So then there's nothing that can stand in the way. You're not going to see people arguing. You're just going to have a small group of people who say, okay, this is who we choose for the president. So the reason I throw this in here is to pose the question to you and get those gears moving that what is the Electoral College still necessary? If Hamilton's saying that it was created to pick the most educated people, a small group of educated people, do we still need that if we all have this constant access to news? And during this time when Hamilton's writing, the use of the popular vote is not the same as what I just told you. So in the beginning of the Electoral College, you had people vote in their electors, and then that was it. Those electors were free to choose and vote on the president in their own choice. Today, we see the popular vote being used to guide who's choosing, who the electors are voting for. And in a lot of states, electors cannot go against the popular vote. But that's not what Hamilton was saying. That's not what the founding fathers dictated the Electoral College would be. So I urge you to kind of think it out here. Do we still need the Electoral College? Which leads me to the last slide. Why does the Electoral College exist? Well, you tell me. Originally, it was supposed to filter out those who were not educated enough to choose the most important person in our government at the time. But why does it exist now? Could there be something that we could use that's better? Now, I want to pose this tidbit to you as well. It is possible, though rare, it has only happened 5 times, that you can win the popular vote. So the majority of the people within the United States, the people casting their ballots, majority number of that, can go to one person, one candidate, and that candidate could lose. I'll tell you when it's happened. It first happened with John Quincy Adams in 1824. It then happened with Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876. It happened with Benjamin Harris in 1888. It happened with George W. Bush in 2000. And it happened again in our last election with President Trump in 2016. Each of those 5 times, the person that was chosen for president won in the Electoral College, but did not win the majority of the people's vote. So I want to talk about how that happens. Let's look at this. Like I said, let's go back to our examples, New York and Texas. So New York, large population in New York City, millions of votes there. Those votes were all cast for Clinton. And in those red states, there were people who voted for Clinton. So just because those electoral votes didn't go towards Clinton doesn't mean that she didn't get a lot of people. Think about California. California is blue there. Large population of people. Look at that, 55 electoral college votes there. So the popular vote, the single votes cast by the people, went to Clinton in this election and went to the opposing people in the other 4 elections that I read you. But the Electoral College still went in favor of Trump. And I'll tell you why. Because in other states that had larger electoral votes, those states went to Trump. Look at Pennsylvania, 20, Ohio, 18, Florida, 29, Texas, 38, Georgia, 16, Arizona, 11. Those are big states to win. And when you break it down and you see all this blue over here, well, when you look at Rhode Island 4, Connecticut 7, Delaware 3, DC 3, those aren't big numbers in the Electoral College. Though they may have had a large population, or at least, thousands and thousands of people, so there are numbers, but they're not big enough. So the Electoral College encourages candidates to go and campaign in states that have bigger Electoral College numbers. That's why it's so important to look at what we call swing states. Swing states like Florida, like Ohio, those states don't tend to be just blue or red. They vote either way in the election. So you see candidates going there because they want to get as many electoral votes as they can. They want to swing people as much as they can. So the Electoral College encourages candidates to go to states that have larger electoral votes and speak to those people. But you still need the small ones too, because you could lose by a small margin. So the Electoral College, I know it can be a complicated idea there, but it is still in place. There have been mishaps, just like we were saying. Can we get rid of it is the main question. Yes, we can. There is a way to get rid of the Electoral College. The way that you can get rid of it is through an amendment made to the Constitution. The reason that hasn't happened is we don't have a better way to run our election than the Electoral College. And I urge you, think of a better way. Think of the problems in that better way, and we'll continue this conversation together. Any questions, any comments, any conversations you want to have, please email me. Don't hesitate to email me. The next time we get together, we will talk about the judicial branch and the historical context of the Constitution.